Okay, welcome everyone. Fostering Media Connections publishes media and journalism to lead the conversation about child welfare, youth justice, and youth homelessness in America. These systems interact with millions of the nation's most vulnerable children and families every year. And research has shown that deep involvement with any of these systems connect to dismal outcomes in adulthood. And yet they are often ignored by mainstream and local media outlets. Youth Voices Rising is a media training program for youth with lived experience in foster care, juvenile justice systems, and/or homelessness. FMC launched the program in 2016 to help youth gain the skills and confidence they need to articulate the policy and practice changes needed to improve the system because they are the experts on what solutions might work. Thank you for being here with us today and happy Leap Day. I hope you're doing something wonderful and fun and historic to celebrate it. My name is Ivory Bennett. I am the program manager for Youth Voices Rising. I have 17 years of lived experience in foster care and a professional background in both educational leadership and national child welfare advocacy. Today, we are exploring the connections between foster care and identity. Welcome to our first webinar of 2024, Who Am I? Differently Abled and Identity Development, where we embark on a journey of understanding, empathy, and empowerment. Through personal narratives and open dialogue, our diverse panel of individuals with lived experience will shed light on the intricate intersectionalities of identities within the child welfare system. As we delve into the complexities of identity development, we aim to increase accessibility, destigmatize various markers, and inspire positive change. Together, let us celebrate diverse voices and foster a more inclusive and understanding child welfare system. Welcome, everyone, to this transformative discussion. Esteemed panelists, drum roll, please. Thank you for being here with us today. Can you briefly introduce yourselves to our audience? Feel free to just chime in and go for it.
My name is Jewel Vaughn. I have over 20 years of lived experience in the child welfare system. I am currently a trainer, producer, and course creator for the Ohio Child Welfare Training Program. I'm happy to be here today to share any insight and to shed any light for any individual that is looking to help create a better system for our youth, which will create a better future for our tomorrow.
Thank you, Joel. Who else wants to go?
I'll go ahead then. My name is Tyler Peters. I was born to the foster care system. I was always under a legal guardian, and I re-entered it during about my freshman year of high school, in which I aged out. And I'm currently like I said, I'm a fourth-year political science student at UCLA with aspirations to go into the field of child welfare. I'm also currently an intern for Fostering Media Connections within their outreach and data departments. So thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. And last but not least, Stafford, go ahead, tell us who you are.
Hi, all. My name is Stafford Purvis, native of Baltimore, Maryland, with about 8 years of foster care lived experience. Um, I am a nomad. I travel the world and have experiences as far as my heart will take me. And I'm very big on community outreach and so glad to be here.
Y'all, do you see my smile? I'm like so excited to talk to y'all. Y'all my cousins, by the way. I always say that. Okay, anyone who is in child welfare, we're cousins now. I'm organizing the cookout. I will send the group text. Okay, so our first question of today is, can y'all share a pivotal moment from your lived child welfare experience that highlights the intersectionality of your identities and how it influenced your journey towards self-acceptance and empowerment?
I'll go ahead and go first on that one. There were a lot of moments throughout my time in care that define who I am today and kind of shed light on who I want to be in the future. And the one that stands out the most was I was in a meeting with a few different case managers that were, talking about my case plan and different things like that. And we were talking about emancipation. I was probably about 18 years old, but I hadn't graduated from high school yet. And one of the caseworkers told another caseworker in the meeting, watch out for her. She's very manipulative. And some way, somehow it ended up getting back to me. I don't know if that caseworker told me, or I don't know exactly, or if the foster parent told me. I don't remember exactly how I found out about it, but it really hurt me because I didn't think I was manipulative at all. I didn't think that I was this bad kid that was just out here trying to play the system or milk the cow or however you want to put that. And it was very eye-opening for me because I've always been intelligent. I've always gotten scholarships to different universities. I've always done great in school. I've always looked at myself as if I was just this really great person. So when they said that, it really made me start to take a step back and look at who I really am as a person. And there are moments in a child's life where people make them look at themselves differently, even if it's true. And even if it's not true, it makes them take a step back and start to really self analyze and decompartmentalize a whole lot of things. And one thing that I realized that kind of bleeds into a question that we're going to talk about later, there's a major difference between being manipulative and being resourceful. There's a major difference between a lot of these stigmas and things that we put on youth that were in care. And depending on how that message is delivered, depends upon how they self-identify, how they accept themselves, what empowers them, what creates the individual that they truly are. So one thing that I want to say in conclusion for that is when we are in these youth's lives, whether we're case managers, policymakers, whatever the case may be, we must be very conscious and aware of the different titles that we label them with, the different conclusions that we draw about them. And when that information is delivered to them, how productive is it to who they are as an individual, whether it's true or whether it's not true? It's very important that we tailor that message because we are making or breaking the lives of our future.
Jewel, like you just dropped so many things, so many gems, so appropriate for your name, right? Because it brings to mind first and foremost the adultification and parentification that so many people in care experience, especially Black and brown girls in particular. And I could talk to y'all all day. Okay, but I'm wondering if Stafford or Tyler would like to share on that question as well, or we can move on. Just let me know how y'all feel.
I can speak a little bit to that question as well. Yes, so I identify as bisexual and non-binary, and I feel as though that my identity, like many other queer foster youth, has played a major role within their experiences being impacted by the system. I think as well a pivotal moment is that kind of that rift between me and social workers because I was at school one day because moments within my family were really just getting very violent and into a breaking point for me. So I was basically begging like my counselors, my teachers every day just to do something to help me. And one of the counselors, after meeting with the social workers, came up and told me and said exactly, they straight up don't believe you. Um, and I really just couldn't understand why. I had demonstrated everything that I was going through, which a lot of it, most probably all of it, was due to my gender and sexual orientation, gender identity and sexual orientation. So I think just those experiences, just being totally discounted for my gender identity, kind of made my resolve that much stronger in wanting to pursue a career in this. I mean, right now I'm working with one of my professors and doing an independent literature review on the challenges queer foster youth face. And I mean, I could go on for this for hours, but I think it just says so much just in the sole statistic that they're 1/3 of foster youth are queer, and that's because they are an extremely vulnerable and you know just an extremely vulnerable group that needs resources that are not there. So
Thank you, Tyler. And just thank you for being so transparent with your story. Representation matters. And I really feel like for our little cousins who are coming up in care right now and who are, going to be facing more years, we're at the end or we're done or we're, 10 or 15 years out of the game, but there are still those who are in care and they need to hear from us and see us. And even though our stories might not be the same, they might be able to take some pieces from what we experienced and learn and experience something better or different for themselves. So thank you. Stafford, how are you feeling about this question? You want me to skip to number 3 for you or? Would you like to
I
speak?
could say a small piece about it. I guess relating to a lot of other people's perhaps experiences, I was bouncing between schools in East Baltimore, and I was going from a new home I had moved to my school that was in the city, and all of a sudden I had to learn how to hide myself because it was no longer cool to be what they would call a nerd or like smart. I remember literally having to hide books in my backpack or like hide them in something so nobody saw the books I was reading. Like back then it was sort of taboo from where I was from to read books like Twilight or The Alchemist. They would look at me. I literally remember looking back now, I feel like it's silly, but I remember really being nervous to tell people, "Oh, I had a Bible in my backpack," or "I had a fictional novel in my something in my backpack to read." And I moved to this place where I couldn't be as comfortable. Um, I had to lie. Um, Normally the way I would talk, even being from the hood I'm from, people would accept me, but I moved to a place where I had to be on defense all the time. And I've never actually learned to undo that. I'm realizing in my social interactions and my interpersonal relationships, when it comes to intimate relationships, when it comes to the way I present myself as far as business, I've never been able to unlearn how to put on a mask. And to this day, and I can actually cognitively like understand when it's happening, but I can't actually stop it. It's something I've been in therapy for about 10 years now, but I actually can't. So I mean, not having to wear a mask and being able to be comfortable and be accepted, um, just is pretty much related to anybody here speaking on the panel. So
You
yeah.
are preaching to the choir, and it's just some things take time. I'm going to be positive and say that one day you'll get there and you'll be able to learn to unmask. It reminds me, I believe it was W.E.B. Du Bois who said the double consciousness that Black people in America often experience too. And there's so much of that, so much of surviving child welfare is being adaptable, right? And I feel like a lot of people who experience child welfare are these chameleons. Like we can go into lots of different places and kind of become whatever we need to become in order to blend in and have our needs met and maintain our safety. And so um, I would just say be careful about the narratives you tell yourself, Safford, and one day you might get there. Let me hop off that soapbox though. We're not here for me. So question number 3 is how do you envision the child welfare system evolving to better accommodate the diverse needs of individuals who are differently abled, who have LGBTQIA2s plus identity, who have varying language barriers and or immigrant identities? What specific changes or initiatives would you recommend to practitioners and policymakers?
I can speak on this. At least from a LGBTQ plus perspective. Um, how do I start? Um, I would say a huge part of it is that we just live in an exceptionally heteronormative society, and that bleeds into how child welfare systems run. Um, from my own experience, I mean, I jumped from foster home to safe house, being homeless, and I would, it was always within the reporting data. Unfortunately, I know that one of the attendees mentioned how maybe LGBTQ plus is underreported given societal pressure. I would agree, but I would also agree that recent administrative changes, they've completely removed sexual orientation and gender identity from reporting guidelines within these social agencies, which has made it that much harder to truly figure out ways to accommodate the needs of those who identify as LGBTQ plus in the child welfare system. But like I was saying, um, it's just a very heteronormative society, and that bleeds into the child welfare system. The foster parents, social workers, they're not adequately trained on how to address the needs of a child who identifies as LGBTQ. And they face discrimination either from a lack of of action in just protecting them just on the sole basis of them being LGBTQ plus. I mean, nearly half of all homeless youth are projected to actually be LGBTQ plus, and it's there needs to be more done in training for foster parents. I mean, LGBT youth face prejudice and abuse from every entity in their lives, from their family, from their other peers within the foster care system, from social workers, and from foster parents. I mean, if you ask any queer foster youth, I believe the reporting is over 80% are in the foster care system because of their gender and sexual orientation. So it is an invisible but hugely overrepresented group within the foster youth population. And as to specific changes or initiatives I would recommend to practitioners and policymakers, like I'm doing my research on, there, because I actually spoke in a phone call with Gerald Mallon. He's the father of this research. He published the first empirical study on gay and lesbian adolescents within the social service systems. That's called "We Don't Get the Welcome Wagon." I definitely recommend reading it if you want a preliminary idea of what it was like back in like 1998. But looking at some of the policies that he would recommend and how that's actually been managed to get achieved, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. There's discrimination based on their gender identity. They're treated differently, especially gay or lesbians, foster youth. If they love somebody of their own gender identity, it's treated differently than if it was a heteronormative relationship. Um, the and I think what's also going on as well is they're just being placed in totally unsafe homes, and foster parents, while they have the right to choose whether or not they want a child within their home, when that child is actually in their home, they have an unbridled right to make sure that that child is free from discrimination or harassment, which is just something that they don't do. And I mean, this is just a little bit of what I could say towards some of the policies that I would recommend, but it totally just needs to be transformed and ensure that, because this is such a vulnerable group. I mean, the vast majority of foster youth who are queer are in the foster youth system because they are queer. So that's a little bit what I don't want to take up too much more time with this question, but um, thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. And you know what? This is the place to take up space. We want you here. This is why we exist, to amplify youth voices and lived experience voices. So thank you for that. And you dropped a lot of knowledge on our listeners and our viewers. So please, please, please heed that research. Get in touch with Tyler. We'll share the contact information later. It sounds like Tyler can help you with your research processes and purposes as well. I don't want to move on without offering this up for Jewel or Stafford as well. Do y'all have any thoughts on what specific changes or initiatives we can recommend to people doing this work when it comes to being just different in any regard?
Any message that I communicate, it always has the precedent of leading with love. There was a story, because I am an advocate for a lot of youth. I hear all different types of stories, even if they're not my own personal experiences, I become aware of them. And there was a young girl, I want to say about 7 years old, from, I can't remember the country right now. Long story short, she was being adopted by a US family here in America, and they went overseas to get her. I'm pretty sure this little girl saw her parents shot and killed in front of her. She's been through a lot of traumatic experiences, but this family here in America really wanted to adopt her. They really wanted to give her a different type of life and expose her to different things. And it sounds beautiful. It sounds like they're leading with love. But mind you, there was a psychologist and a CASA worker that was trying to connect with this young girl to help her sort through some of the traumatic experiences that she's been through. There definitely was a language barrier there. And the little girl opened up to the psychologist, didn't care much for the CASA worker, but she opened up to the psychologist and she really started to pour her heart out and give her insight as to what was going on, how she felt, the things that she saw. And this family was furious. They were absolutely livid. They were angry that the little girl would open up to the psychologist, but wouldn't open up to them. They did not want this little girl to acknowledge her culture. They didn't want her to talk about her traumas. They didn't want her to reopen wounds that they assumed were closed. For some reason, they assumed they were closed. And when I say lead with love, a lot of times when we think about people being different, whether it's culturally, language barriers, LGBTQ plus, whatever the case may be as to why they are different, we want to assimilate them. We want to say, okay, you're different because of this, but this is why you should join our group because we should all be the same, or it's easier if we were all the same, or it's easier if we all thought the same and had the same processes. But every single difference that we have has a culture attached to it, whether that's the culture as far as the language, the way they think, the way they behave, whatever the case may be, there's a culture attached to it. So if you want to take away their entire culture and assimilate it into theirs, it's removing their identity. It's causing confusion. It's enhancing mental health issues. And when I say lead with love, sometimes, yes, we don't want people to have these struggles. Yes, we don't want people to feel different, but our assimilation is what really makes them feel different. When in every other species, I know it's cliche, but in every other species, we admire their differences, the different type of fish, the different type of animals, the different type of plants. We admire that, but why don't we do that with humans? It truly adds value to any equation when you have different, diverse perspectives, experiences, all of the above. It makes it so much more rich. I used to call it, because I love to cook, I call it seasoning. It adds seasoning to the pot. It makes it taste good, it makes it feel good. It just makes it so much better. So when I say lead with love, that's definitely one of the things that we want to do, is not immediately push our own initiatives onto other people. Truly take the time out to understand where they're coming from and what they have going on. And that leading with love consists of that. The second thing is, when it comes to policymakers, caseworkers, and people that are making decisions for the child welfare program or child welfare system, there's a lot of burnout. There are a lot of caseworkers, there's a lot of people that they've been doing this for years and years, and maybe they're overworked. Maybe they're not getting enough finances. Maybe they're not getting enough incentives. Maybe they're not seeing enough results in the lives of these youth. Whatever the case may be, they are facing burnout. And because of this burnout, the children are the ones that are suffering as well, because they don't give as much as they used to give. They don't fight for them as hard as they used to fight for them. And it's becoming a lost cause all the way across the board mentally for a lot of people, because there is burnout. No one truly sees profit in what they're doing in the areas that they're in. How do you attack that? They have all these trainings that they're supposed to go to. They have all these different webinars, something similar to this. But how do you attack that feeling of being a human and wanting to be a part of something greater, wanting to contribute to something greater, but you don't see tangible results? You don't see measurables for what you're doing. And I think that's something that collectively we have to start to work towards, is how can we see more measurables? How can we avoid this burnout? Are there mental health services for our lawmakers, our policymakers? Because when you think about multi-level marketing companies, they have some music playing, and they got this, like, everybody's going on a rally and they're rallying behind these things to sell TVs, to sell vacuum cleaners. So that's the second point. The third point is, when we go to Walmart and we buy a TV or a vacuum, we get a receipt. We can take it back. We can take it back to the store if we don't like it. Why can't we take kids back? Why can't we take kids back just like we could take back a vacuum cleaner or a TV, just because we don't like it, or we assume it's not a good fit? And I don't want to say that we should leave a child with a family that clearly doesn't want them, but we should do a better vetting process. I know homes are limited and different things like that, but we should have a better vetting process to where you can't just give a kid back. Because when you think about their culture, their identity, their empowerment, oh, that is a blow. Like any abuse, any neglect, that is a blow to be taken back. To have a family tell you that they don't want you, to tell you that it's not a good fit, that is a blow. So to sum it up, lead with love, address the burnout, address the cultural biases that we have within ourselves, truly understand why we're doing what we're doing, what are our intentions, and think about others a little bit more than we think about ourselves.
Jewel, who told you? Okay, you know what? We're gonna have to talk on my podcast, okay? But you touched on so many things, the cultural competency element of it. And I'm also hearing the need to be curious, right? Because everyone has some different difference. Everyone has some difference. And just because, that might not be what they lead with, it doesn't mean that it's not there. So how can we be curious about our own differences first as people, as practitioners, but then also extend that curiosity out to others and replace it with an excitement? Because when it comes to curiosity, it's meant to be something that serves us towards growth. So how can we lead with that curiosity and lead with that heart? um just wow. I know Stafford got something percolating too, but I'm gonna move on to our next question. Okay, Stafford, if you want to throw it in there later, feel free. Jewel, did you want to say something else?
I was about to apologize for taking up your time.
Y'all don't stop apologizing to me, please. We are here to amplify you, okay? The people will listen. The people have come to hear what you have to say. And more importantly, I show up to this job every day to hear what you all have to say and to publish it and to help you with it and to nurture it and to grow it. And so this is your space. Take up time, reclaim your time and take up space. I'm inviting you to do that. All right. And one more thing, that also is a tenet of white supremacy culture, white dominant culture, of oppressive culture, that we feel we have to apologize for taking up space, that we feel we have to apologize for authentically engaging and standing in our truth and telling our stories. And so I'm not going to ever facilitate that in a space that I'm in. So y'all be you, okay? Fully and wholeheartedly. Okay. Next question. In navigating the child welfare system, what barriers did you encounter related to accessibility, stigmatization, or biases, and how did you overcome or address them? And what lessons can practitioners learn from your experiences to create more inclusive and supportive environments?
Stafford, you go first.
Okay. No, first off, just hats off to you. You were preaching, and honestly, I was trying not to get too passionate, when you were talking, and thank you for that, honestly. To the question, barriers. Um, well, I should start off by saying by the time that I was in the system heading into, this is me experiencing puberty in the system as a 6'5", 300-pound Black man, um, as well as a Black man identifying with bipolar disorder, ADHD, paranoid schizophrenia, uh, as well as a lot of other health issues that some people claim to be inclusive of and, want to deal with, but not, especially with me dealing with Crohn's. I ran into a lot, whether it was in the school system, whether it was people feeling like they were being inconvenienced, whether it's people who, and to that last point, it ties directly into what you were saying with leading with love. The vetting process when it comes to this is directly related to barriers, because the vetting system isn't as thorough as it may seem, despite how many classes you may need to take or programs. They need to be behavioral tests. They need to be a tracking of a history. Like, you should be able to go back a certain amount of time and track this person's record or these people's record or this organization or this group's record, because leading with love, sadly, is not always the outcome. It isn't always the way people communicate. And when it comes to accessibility, especially dealing with all those different issues, you'll find they may have a budget, they may have made preparations inside of their head, just different families talking for different families. Um, but the reality of it can be a lot more scary. The reality of it can be a lot more overwhelming, especially if you have underlying issues that you're dealing with that are unresolved before you take on a child or before you take on children. Um, and me personally, I just always felt like there was a gap between what I was promised and what I got, and uh, what was available. Because you have to be able to accommodate, you have to be able to move, you have to be able to pivot. And that's why I'm saying this vetting process needs to be a lot more thorough, at least as far as accessibility for, whoever you decide to take on goes. Sorry, I was rambling. It goes left and right. It goes left and right.
Stafford, y'all gonna stop saying sorry, okay? Like, I need y'all to really just stand up and own it. Own your voices, okay? But you touched on something so important too, is the utilization of the resources that already exist. When we think about what do we already have working in the system, right? And Jewel, you touched on this at the beginning of the conversation, getting labeled when you actually do tap into those resources as, oh, you're being greedy or you're being manipulative. And it's like, a double-edged sword, because you can utilize the resources and you can make yourself aware of them and use them as much as you can and get the most out of it, or you cannot use them and then also deal with the consequences of that. And so, but that ties back into the adultification and parentification of youth and care too, right? We're not being perceived as youth or children, we're being perceived as manipulative adults who lie or who cheat or who steal. And so it's just a really double-edged sword, just to keep in mind with everyone. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to move on to our next question, but also panelists, if y'all want to chime in or throw in anything, feel free. This is your space. This is our space together. So as someone with lived experience, what advice would you offer to practitioners and organizations seeking to foster a more inclusive and affirming space for individuals with diverse identities within the child welfare system? How can they effectively engage with and empower those they serve? But I want to pause. Jewel, you wanted to say something?
I think this is good because I can combine both of those questions together into one response, because when we talk about barriers, there are the same barriers that prevent them from providing these programs. So when we go back to the manipulative and the resourcefulness, I'm a researcher. I love looking things up. I love making connections. I love not recreating the wheel. If it's already out there, let's piggyback and continue. And when I was in care, I found out about so many different programs. Like, I can speak specifically to Ohio. And because Ohio is a beautiful state in itself, there were still 88 counties that we say do things 88 different ways. So you have a federal legislation that trickles down to the state, and then the counties do with it as they please. And then the people within the county agencies do with it as they please. And then it trickles down to the youth. I think it's very important that there's synergy amongst these programs. We have Ohio Means Jobs, or Job and Family Services, that also controls how these programs are dispersed, but they're not aware of other programs, the community programs, the different nonprofit agencies. I feel like if there was a collective database or some type of resource that connected these resources, sort of like a map, then everyone wouldn't be so burnt out or bent out of shape about programs not being available because the next guy over here does it. You just don't know about it. And then the youth finds out about it, tells you about it, and you're mistrustful, or you don't believe what they say, and you still don't go back and double check and see. So in all actuality, there are a lot of programs out there to help these different groups, but they're not getting that mainstream media. They're not getting that light shined upon them to help the youth. They're not getting that funding because the funding is going where the funding has always gone. And in those buckets where the funding has always gone, it's very much governmental, with red tape, things they can and can't do. And you have these community agencies that don't have as much red tape that can get a little bit of that funding as well, and they have similar initiatives. So overall, I'm saying it's very important to have collective databases and synergy to know what's available. And by knowing what's available, you can help the youth a little bit more without you having to put so much strain on your agency or your agency workers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is also where I want to put a plug for lived experts. Hire people with lived experience, because we bring to the table that experience, that knowledge, and we can help strategize as to how you can have policies within your institutions, whatever they may be, that can address this seamlessly and effortlessly. So write it in your budgets, plan for accordingly, give them full benefits so they can be 100% available to the job at hand, and allow them to guide you in this. I know so many people with lived experience who are also amazing experts in child welfare and child welfare related things who could contribute to this work positively. But I want to check in with Tyler and Stafford. How y'all feeling? What are you thinking about how people can engage with and empower those they serve with their diverse identities?
Well, just to speak on that, especially with coming from my own queer identity, um, the best way to affirm queer foster youth is to stop treating them differently or as inferior to their heteronormative counterparts. I mean, I think if you look at any upcoming and already put in place policies, especially in California, it's really been shown that treating somebody who has something that's not a traditional heterosexual relationship or a traditional gender identity, by treating them differently, you are perpetuating a hatred, and this hatred festers within us. And I think, just speaking a little bit about this within the context of my own experiences, is, you know, my gender identity, my sexual orientation, there was nothing done to support it, even though I faced abuse from pretty much every level. And I also, just to say something as well regarding this, is you have to be careful, because queer foster youth, I believe the stats are they're going to have maybe 50% more foster homes than an average foster youth. And I've worked as an intern for 6 months in the Children's Law Center in Monterey Park. And one of the biggest takeaways I got from that experience is that the attorneys, people involved with that system in and of itself, it's very widespread and commonly known that the system in and of itself is a form of trauma. Every time you move to a different home, every time you have to speak to a social worker, go to court, I mean, it just perpetuates this trauma, and continues to fester itself as a hatred for their own gender identity, because then they start feeling as though they're wrong for loving somebody differently, or loving people more than somebody else would. And it breaks me. I mean, and to touch on like the resources, I mean, sometimes I don't even know how I got to this position. I mean, it's whenever I speak to professors, or counselors, or therapists, or psychiatrists, there's always this one word: you're a miracle. I mean, to be honest, it kind of makes me feel like shit. I am a miracle in this system, that because I was able to go to college and pursue my passions, I'm a miracle in the eyes of society. And it's heartbreaking. Um, so just to conclude on that, support queer youth. I just think, it just in and of itself, it's so heartbreaking that somebody could be so hated just because they either love more or love differently. And it's and there should be more spaces there. When I was in high school, they had to, and I will say this was something that I think I had never seen done before, and I truly think that steps like this is in the right direction. But when I was going through that tumultuous time in high school, where I was, I mean, I nearly died because of my sexual orientation and gender identity, they were able to work with therapists and counselors in a local TAY center, within their foster youth, within their queer therapy department, and they were able to arrange transportation completely confidential. I think they may even broken a few laws with that, but they knew that if my parents ever found out about what I was doing, or more about my gender identity, I would be in serious harm. And I think that the steps this country has gone in wanting to um what paint being queer, or having a different sexual orientation, as just youth in general, they just painted in such a horrible light. I mean, I like I was speaking with Mr. Mal, and the really the father of all this sort of research within queer foster youth. It's sickening. I mean, what they are doing to trans kids, what they're doing to queer youth, and they make it just so unwelcoming to even it almost makes you feel as though it's like criminalized. I'm sure I for lack of a better word, but it's I'm just kind of going on a tangent here, but I think, just going back to that question of how do you make an affirming space for foster youth, be accommodating, be flexible. I mean, I mean, 9 times out of 10, their gender identity is the reason that they're system impacted to begin with, and there needs to be resources and affirmations done to ensure that foster youth are supported with their gender identity, and they aren't treated differently because of this weird heteronormative society we live in. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Tyler. I really do appreciate it. And what I heard, long story short, was do whatever you can to support youth with different LGBTQIA2s status. And that just looks like whatever is in their means to do it. So if you can drive them to a support group, or if you can celebrate or uplift them, don't be afraid. Can I ask a question really quickly? So for those who are listening, Tyler, what would that have looked like if they asked you? How would you have preferred to have been asked about how you could feel celebrated or supported in terms of your identity?
I feel as though that I think having camaraderie, I mean, I feel like I'm actually going to be kind of leaning in towards a later question with my answer to this, with how this contributes to a sense of belonging, dignity, and dignity for individuals with these marginalized identities. Um, Being able to share these experiences with people with similar identities of my own, being able to have therapists and resources from places that foster these identities and celebrated them rather than painted it as something different or something that I should be ashamed of. I mean, this all seems like very obvious advice, but I mean, looking at the data, a lot of foster youth, they face this abuse from the social workers who don't know how to respond when they come across a queer child. And and because they don't know how to respond, that child ends up being discounted entirely. And I you know, I just going from my own personal experiences, this is every so within my high school growing up, I feel as though the LGBT community within my high school was very closely knit, and everything that I went through, I could say pretty much all everybody else, we all went through the same thing, being totally um, accosted for our sexual orientation, our gender identity. I have a good friend, and back in high school when I got my first car, or this was a little bit after high school, while he was still in high school, we had a little bit of a grade difference. He'd call me up every so time saying, you know, things have gotten bad. Please pick me up, and I would be there, you know, and and I'm going on a tangent again, but you know, just create spaces that foster these connections that build a sense of camaraderie and know that, you know, they're not alone with this experience being, you know, so marginalized because of their gender identity. So I think as long as you can facilitate these spaces that celebrate their gender identity and their sexual orientation, rather than making them feel as though that you know, this is an unnatural thing that they should be ashamed of. I mean, that's the essence of it. You know, they should be celebrating their queerness rather than feeling as though they have to hide it.
Mm. Thank you so much, Tyler. And I'm also going to throw this plug out there. We need to have sex education for people in care. And that will encompass all of those things too. The more we can educate people on these different aspects of identity, the more empowered that they will ultimately be. And I think that Jules said it best earlier, where every identity has a community attached to it. And I am someone with a chronic illness, an invisible chronic illness. And I've had it, I first found my community when I was in college around the age of 19, 20 years old. But I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 16. And let me tell you something, I did not feel supported or seen or understood or heard until I found my community at my university. And so community is so important. And if there is a community where you can take your youth with that different identity and give them a chance to normalize it, give them a chance to see other people experiencing it and living through it. And even if they're having different experiences, that's okay. Because those are informative things too. And that's wonderful too. And not only does that foster that community for them, it gives them an expansion in their mind of what the possibilities are for their own identity, right? So I'm gonna hop off my soapbox, and I also want to leave time for us to get questions from the audience. Some have been trickling in during this conversation here today. But one of our last questions is on identity development. And identity development is a complex journey, especially within the context of the child welfare system. Can you speak to the importance of representation and visibility for marginalized communities within the system and how it contributes to a sense of belonging, dignity, and agency for individuals with diverse identities? And Tyler already kind of spoke on that in his last response, but Stafford or Jewel, if y'all want to jump in, please feel free.
It's perfect to have this question at the very end, and I love the way that this discussion has blossomed into the beautiful flower that it has, because everything that we've talked about is simply the answer. There is a community that is out there for that youth, and that youth needs to have access to it. Um, I think the biggest thing for me when it came to my identity was there were so many. We'll go back to a flower because I love plants. It's so many petals attached to the one stem of me. You have petals that are being developed because of the reason why you're put in care. You have petals being developed because of your DNA. You have petals of your identity being developed because of the type of school that you're in, the type of neighborhood you're in, the different financial status. You have all these different things that are outside of you that you have no control over, but they contribute to your identity. And then as you get older, you start to say, okay, I don't want that on my identity, but I want this to be a part of my identity. And you start picking and choosing, and some stuff you can't really get rid of, and some stuff you can't really add on, even though you like it and you want it to be a part of you. And this is what our youth go through. This is what our youth experience. This is why I like to say, don't put band-aids on bullet holes, because people like to look at the youth in care and see their symptoms and identify their symptoms as their identity, when in reality, sometimes there's a lot of confusion. Sometimes there's a lot of mixed messages, and we really don't know what to do. So we explode out of our skin, and maybe we may act out, but it's only because of all of that pressure. And my name is Jewel, so I get a lot of analogies about diamonds and different things like that. And if you take a piece of coal and you put a bunch of pressure on it over time, it can then turn into a beautiful diamond. But the luxury that our youth in care and that we in care didn't have is that there isn't that much time to truly cultivate that diamond. It's just pressure. The time is like boom, and it's just pressure. So it's really important as an agency or someone that is in the lives of these youth that you take the time to truly understand what it is that they're experiencing. Because social media, there are so many different aspects to how identity is formed in a human being. So many different aspects. So when you talk about representation and visibility for marginalized communities, to have a community to be like, huh, I can breathe. I'm not the only one going through this. I'm not the only one experiencing this. You did what when you experienced? Oh, I could try that. That might work for me. Like all of that is so vital. And don't ever tell me that you can't find it, because it's out there. Every single culture, every single community, every single everything has a village. It has a tribe attached to it, because we are human, but we are human. We are human, but we are human. There is always someone else out there that is going through something similar. It doesn't mean that it's exactly the same, but it's similar, and we can help each other. All we have to do is put our pride to the side and be a little bit more transparent. Be a little bit more transparent. And I think it's important when you even think about the diverse identities when it comes to gender and sexuality. A lot of people question intentions and not look at the facts. I don't think it's our ability or privilege to judge or question intention. You don't look at someone of Latino descent and be like, oh, well, what country did your great great grandmother come from? We don't have that privilege to dissect and take apart someone's identity. We don't have that privilege, especially when we don't identify as it ourselves. So it's really important that Again, I always say lead with love, put that pride to the side and put yourself in someone else's shoes and actually ask the questions that aren't offensive, but allows you to be curious, a healthy curious to where you can truly tap into their mindset, tap into what it is that they're experiencing. Then you'll be able to identify the communities that can help them.
Thank you for that. So much that came to mind was intention versus impact, right? And also be willing to learn. If you make a mistake and you ask an offensive question or do something, be willing to hear feedback and to learn and to grow and to be better. I'm going to hop onto our last question so we can start wrapping up, but I want to call on Stafford because I feel like we need to hear from you one more time. However, let me throw the last question out there too, in case you want to throw it into your response. So when we think about our baby cousins, right, who are still in care or who are going to come up in care and they're going to do their time, like it's a prison system. But we can talk about that another time. Those who still have bids, for those who are still in care, excuse my French, what advice would you offer to them about grappling with their different identities and abilities? And what would you like to leave with them as a final word?
Um, I would just start with leaning off of the last question, not only representation, but visibility of the representation and accessibility to the visibility of the representation is of the utmost important. Like you, I didn't really find a community of mine until college. I was blessed to and go back to the reason why I feel like it's the most important. If you don't see it, either you give up or you jump to lengths to find out where it is. Now, if I had seen the representation in East Baltimore, I would have likely not did and sold everything I had to jump to Atlanta, which by association ended me in my community at Morehouse College. But outside of that, I would have never made it if I wasn't so desperate. But desperation can lead to a lot of different branches. It could have taken me anywhere. Um, there were times personally, because I didn't see anyone that I could remotely or felt like I could remotely relate to, and I didn't see any resources. It's not like I was heavy on Google at the time. Um, you get desperate. I start trying to create or force things into something I can understand or I can relate to. And because I didn't feel warmth from the community, I started fires, so to say. So the representation of that, and I guess to the kids that are currently there, little cousins, uh, is this isn't by no way means to be malicious or don't take this the wrong way, but don't listen to anybody. I would say take everything, don't even take it as a grain of salt. Don't listen to nobody. If you want a different life, if you want something different, convince yourself before anybody else, because nobody's going to believe you till you believe yourself, that whatever it is you want is real. There is nothing that you can tell me about me, at least non-constructively, that I am willing to listen to. And you have to make it. Like I can't verbalize that enough. Nobody believed me until I believed me. In fact, to this day, some people don't even believe I am where I am. They say, Stafford, where you at? I say, I'm over here doing this. I say, what? You? Man, what you playing, boy? Show them a picture. They're like, no, it's Photoshop. Send them a letter. They say, oh no, you forged it. Send them a picture. You know what I'm saying? So don't listen to nobody. That's and I don't mean to say I'm meaning no to anybody that may be headed towards, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
Thank you, Stafford. Jewel, and then we'll wrap up with Tyler.
I love that, Stafford. That was absolutely beautiful because it's I know 50 and 60-year-olds right now that are still blaming their parents, their auntie, their cousins for why their life looked the way it looks. Mind you, they're 50 and 60. Like how long are you going to continue to blame someone else or it's very crucial for our younger cousins to truly understand that this is their life. You have people that have been strategically placed in your life to help you, to teach you, to guide you, to mold you, to develop you, to aid you. And just because they do or don't do what they're supposed to do does not negate the fact that this is your life, that you are your own individual. You must know who you are before anyone will know who you are. I love the way you said that. And when you say don't listen to anybody, literally, there are people that are placed into your life to hold you back sometimes. There are people that are placed into your life to propel you to the next level, but there are also ones to keep you stagnant and keep you where you are. And it's important for our younger cousins to truly know the difference between the two, because we form very unhealthy relationships at early ages and we consider those to be normal, and they're not. They're far from it. And healthy relationships are so important. So I just really wanted to piggyback off of that. And I love that point that you brought out, because we have to take accountability for our lives. And sometimes we may be under the influence of other people's lives, other people's fears, other people's hiccups, other people's trauma. And that then fuels something within us that probably was never even there. So it's very important that we take accountability for who we are. We take accountability for where we want to be, all of the above. So I just wanted to piggyback and say that I love that point.
Thank you, Joel. And then Tyler, last but not least, take us away.
I'll keep this brief, but I just wanted to say that, what I would say for these youth, marginalized youth within the child welfare system, but really any youth in the child welfare system, don't be discouraged if you feel that you aren't doing as well as your counterparts, because the system has set us up to fail. From the very beginning, you have been set up to fail, and is by no fault of your own. Any struggle that you may face, we live in a society that doesn't like the idea of caring for those who are the most vulnerable. And I'm sorry, but know that it is not your fault, and that the system has inherently set you up to fail. And I encourage you, make complaints, go make complaints to the foster youth ombudsman, stir the pot, make your voice heard, because by voicing the disparities that you face within the system is going to be the only way to fix it. So
Y'all are just so inspiring. Thank you for sharing your light with us today. Joel, I want to give you the chance to speak. Go for it.
I just wanted to just add a little tidbit, because Tyler said that the system was put into place and everything is set up for us to fail. And I disagree with that statement. There are a lot of systems put into place that are designed for us to fail. However, the child welfare system was not one of those. The parents that we had, the caregivers that we had, the cards that we were dealt at birth, that is what indeed set us up to fail. But the child welfare system originally was put into place to try to help. They were trying to help and try to rectify something that was already broken, already failed. And because we don't see them helping good enough, we think that they're the ones that are failing us. In reality, we have to go to the root of how we even got into care. And honestly, because I've been so intermingled with the system from, training the caregivers and teaching and different things like that, I kind of have a different perspective of insight now. Because when I was in care, yeah, the system is there to fail us, it's doing me bad, it's doing me dirty, it's doing me worse than my parents just sent me home. Like, I had that perspective, but now I understand that the child welfare system is truly a blessing. It's just the people that are taking positions now, they don't have as much passion as they did before. They don't have the heartstrings that they used to have before. And it goes back to that burnout. So I don't want to contradict anything too much, because everything else that you said was spot on. But the child welfare system in itself, I personally don't believe has set us up to fail. If anything, is propelling us to success. They paid me to go to school throughout college. They set me up with housing, all these different safety nets that I would not have had I been at home with my birth family, removing me from a situation of trauma, abuse, and neglect that I probably would have had to stay in if it wasn't for the child welfare system. So I don't necessarily want to say that it set us up to fail, but as an advocate for the youth, do not intentionally fail the youth when you have the power not to do so.
Thank you. We are at time. So for those of you who have to leave us, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who have a few moments, we are going to open it up for questions and answers. I just want to remind you, look, these are my little cousins. Y'all need to be respectful, okay? Don't talk bad to them, talk sweet, ask nice questions. We're here to learn and to grow, but my first priority is to protect them. So be kind with the words that you use, but feel free to drop them in the chat. What would you like to hear? And we did have one question to get us started from earlier in the conversation. Did anyone experience being an LGBTQ plus youth under an agency that refused LGBTQ plus foster or adoptive parents? And if so, how did that impact you in your relationship with the agency? Would anyone like to share, or can anyone speak on that?
Well, I'd say not so much that they refused, but it was just never an option. Whether it be due to a lack of availability or just due to a lack of record keeping in ensuring, because really those policies of placing gay and lesbian foster youth with gay and lesbian couples, that goes back to the 70s. I mean, this has been going on for over 50 years, and it's still just what's the word I'm looking for? It's just vilified, and to oh, you want to place a child with a same-sex couple, it becomes some sort of this awful political statement. And back to that question of whether or not, so I would say I just don't think it was ever an option for me. And I think because of that was because they changed the reporting rules. They changed, I even though I told them I was bisexual, that I was non-binary, that I feel that though I have been prejudiced because of my gender identity. Um, it just, I felt as though it was a form of discrimination through inaction. I was, my sexual orientation and gender identity was totally discounted in my placements. And I feel as though that wasn't right, because I ended up truly getting some awful placements that only perpetuated that hatred for my own gender identity. So
Thank you. Any other questions? Anything y'all are wondering?
I also
Anything?
want to add another perspective on that question, because I do the pre-service training for, prospective foster parents and whatnot. And that's why I mentioned earlier that we don't have the privilege to question one's intentions. Yes, we're supposed to weave between fact and fiction because, there may be predators, or maybe all different type of ill intent. But when everything lines up, we don't have that privilege. For instance, um, there was a gay couple, two men that wanted to only adopt African, or foster and adopt African American boys that were gay. And they were denied their license because they thought that that was too specific, as if they were targeting these youth, as if it was a problem. And I don't know how many cases like this are out there, to where we say that there's a shortage of homes, but then we get these certain type of people that are interested and we deny them. We don't have the privilege to say, because these two men are the way they are, they only want to help someone that is the way that they are. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am today if I wasn't able to help people that I've had similar experiences with, that I could relate to on a similar level. So I just really think that it's important that we take a look at things from all angles. Yes, we want to protect our youth. Yes, we want to shield them from any wrongdoing or anything like that, but we should also not shield them too much that we discredit any possibility of helping them.
Thank you for sharing that. There was another question too in the chat that I wanted to share. Liz said, any local resources for the 3 locations I'm working at: LA, Atlanta, or New York? Do y'all have any at the top of mind? And Liz, we also have databases on our website, so check out fosteringmediaconnections.org. We have a lot of resources that we've compiled over the years on different areas of identity, for post-secondary education and support. And also, I dropped the contact information in the chat a few moments ago for all of our panelists. Please feel free to engage with them, hire them, pay them as lived experts for them helping you do better work in whatever areas it is that you do. But can y'all think of any resources that you'd like to share, panelists?
I personally am not familiar with those areas, but if you hire me, I'll do all the research necessary.
I know that's right. We do have one more question and then I'll wrap us up because we do have to get back to things. But I'm gonna hold y'all accountable. Please be on my podcast, okay, besties? So I'll send you an email. Y'all can come talk to me on there and y'all can tune in and listen to part 2 of this conversation. But Nicholas asked, what are your thoughts on data collection of LGBTQS youth? Do you want that information collected? If so, how do we protect that information from others that they may not want to have that information? I think that Tyler might be our resident expert on LGBTQ research right now. Forgive me if I've misspoken. Tyler, feel free to interject, but I think the first important thing is consent and be mindful that youth grow and change. And so what they've consented to at 7 or 12 or 17 may very much be different when they're 18, 21, 35. So just, have that keep that in mind when working with youth and when getting consent, and keep their trajectory and their growth in mind and the integrity of that in mind. But go ahead, feel free. I think you
Yes, so on my thoughts on data collection of LGBTQ youth, I think first and foremost, it's important. I think there needs to be records kept of foster youth, of their numbers, of how best we can support them, because they're already an invisible yet overrepresented group in foster care system. And I would argue, I would argue probably one of the most, marginalized groups, with the largest marginalized, one of the largest marginalized groups within the foster care system. And if we don't take the resources, we don't take the steps to really study this empirically, and to look at all the facts and the data, I mean, I think just answering the question on premise of the dangers of collecting information on LGBTQ youth, I feel as though, I mean, there's sensitive data kept on all sorts of topics, ranging from healthcare, to the Census Bureau. And if they can manage to keep the data safe, I don't feel as though it can be any differently. I mean, there are, of course, like with any other um online database, there's always, dangers of breaches or leaks or what have you, but there's always a way to approach it safely, whether through an anonymousness, if that's even a word, but through an anonymity. I've just done midterms, so I'm a little bit tired, but there are ways to protect this information, and it's not any different from any other protected field of I mean, if we can if healthcare can utilize HIPAA, then I feel as though this can be no different, and I don't think there's any sort of particular danger to record keeping of queer foster youth than there would be in any other field, and I think there would only be benefits from it. I mean, the Trump administration got rid of census taking of foster youth within social services, and they suffered because of that. I mean, if you look at the trends, policy effectiveness went down, and foster youth hurt because they weren't being represented. And I think that well, of course, I think with any sensitive data, there are precautions that need to be taken. The benefits vastly outweigh any sort of um threat that a breach or something may happen. And again, like I said, doing this on the basis of anonymity, and maybe purging the records after they exit the foster care system or what have you. I mean, there are ways to approach this, and I think the benefits totally outweigh the cons.
Thank you so much. Do we have anything else? So contact information again has been dropped in the chat. I think 2 or 3 times at this point. Please, please, please feel free to reach out to all of our panelists. And if you can't get in touch with them for whatever reason, reach out to me, Ivory at fosteringmediaconnections.org. And I am just, y'all, seriously, you inspire me and you give me courage and strength to do this job. It's not easy, but people like you, stories like you, courageous storytellers like yourselves are one of the reasons why I'm able to do this. So thank you, thank you, thank you again. I seriously mean that we're cousins. So if y'all need something, call me. Even if I can't give it to you, I can give you some love and some encouragement, some support, right? That's what big cousins are for. So I'm here for you. I really am. I have deep gratitude in my heart for you. And I wish you nothing but the best and all the success and joy that your heart and your hands can hold. So for those of you listening, thank you for joining us here today. Again, this has been a production of Youth Voices Rising through Fostering Media Connections. We are going to share all of those wonderful resources. We're going to share the recording and the transcripts. Please feel free to add us on social media and sign up on our newsletters where you can capture stories like these and others in different formattings. We have not only published op-eds, but we have magazine offerings, podcast offerings, social media posts. So, connect with us, make it do what it do. We are so grateful for you and for the work that you do. Thank you again, and you have a wonderful day.